All right, let's dive into a really fascinating thought experiment. It's one of those ideas that kind of messes with your head in a good way, by challenging the very nature of logic. We're going to talk about what happens when facts and rules seem to collide, and how that can sometimes point us towards some pretty deep hidden truths. So let's just kick things off with a big question. What happens when you see something with your own two eyes that just seems to completely break a rule you thought was unbreakable? You know, when reality just doesn't seem to add up? Does that mean logic itself is broken? Let's find out.
Okay, so to really get into this, we first have to establish some common ground. We need to lay down a simple, universal truth that pretty much everyone can agree on.
Now, we're not talking about opinions here. We're talking about the foundational rules of reality. These are absolute principles that just can't be broken. You could almost think of them as the operating system for the entire universe.
And here's a super simple way to think about it. You just can't pour 2 full glasses of tea from one smaller teacup, right? It's just common sense. What comes out can't be more than what went in.
And this simple idea, it really expands into a core principle for, well, almost everything. If you change the spices in a recipe, the taste is going to change. You alter one little line of code, and a whole program can act differently. The rule is incredibly simple. The output always reflects the input.
Okay, so we've got our unbreakable rule locked in. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when we see a fact, something happening in the real world, that seems to completely shatter this fundamental rule? So look at this. On one side, we've got our rock-solid rule. If the input changes, the output absolutely must change. But then, look at the other side. We have this fact. The input is changing, we can see it. But the output? It's staying stubbornly, impossibly, the exact same. So how on earth is that possible?
And that's the puzzle, isn't it? If a fact from the real world seems to contradict a universal truth, does that mean the truth itself was just wrong all along? Does our whole logical framework just sort of collapse?
But here's the twist. The answer is a pretty powerful no. The universal truth isn't wrong. What's wrong is our understanding. It's just incomplete. We're clearly missing a piece of the puzzle here.
We can actually use logic itself to figure this out. Let's just walk through it. Okay, step 1, we're holding that the rule is absolute. Step 2, we're accepting that the contradictory fact is real. So, if both of those things are true, then there's only one conclusion left, right? Step 3, something else, some other force, has to be at play.
And this, right here, is the crucial insight. A contradiction like this isn't a sign of chaos. It's actually like a giant blinking neon arrow pointing directly at a hidden variable, that piece of the puzzle that we just haven't accounted for yet. And that blinking arrow? It leads us right to the core idea of this entire thought experiment, the concept of an external, hidden constant. Here it is. This is the solution. If the output isn't changing even though the input is, it can only mean that some unseen force is holding it steady. There's something outside the system that is locking in that result, basically overriding any changes we can see.
So we call this thing the constant. And it's the hidden truth that makes the whole paradox just dissolve. It's this external influence that we weren't seeing before, and it makes sure the outcome stays the same. Suddenly, the universal rule is still true, and the fact we observed is also true. They can coexist.
Let's go all the way back to our tea example, because now it makes perfect sense. If you see 2 full glasses of tea being poured from one tiny little cup, it's not magic. The rule isn't broken. It just means someone, just out of sight, is secretly refilling the cup. There's an external input, a constant supply that you didn't know about.
But you know, solving one puzzle just opens the door to another, and this one's even bigger. What is the nature of all these hidden constants that might be governing our world?
You can see how this line of thinking can take you on a pretty wild journey. You start by asking, okay, what is the constant? That's really a question for physics. But that question leads you to ask, how does it work? And suddenly, you're wading into metaphysics. And from there, it's a pretty short leap to asking the biggest question of all. Who put it there?
And that is really the final, powerful question we're left with. When we see an output that seems to defy its input, we now know we should be looking for a hidden constant. But the more profound question, the one that really sticks with you, is what or who is locking that constant in place? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with us.